The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. The desert stretched endlessly before the town of Red Hollow, a forgotten speck on the map where the sun seemed to linger too long, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. The wind carried whispers of dust swirling around the sagging wooden porches of the few buildings still standing. It was 1887, and Red Hollow was a place where dreams came to die, where folks clung to hope like a frayed rope over a canyon. Among the weathered faces and calloused hands, there was a stranger who arrived one dusk, his boots kicking up clouds of red earth as he stepped off the stagecoach. His name was Elias Kane, a man with eyes like storm clouds and a smile that didn't quite reach them. He carried a leather satchel, worn but heavy, and a guitar slung across his back, its strings glinting faintly in the fading light. The townsfolk watched him from behind curtains and half-closed saloon doors, curious but wary. Strangers didn't come to Red Hollow unless they were running from something or toward it. Elias tipped his hat to no one in particular and made his way to the only inn, a creaking two-story building called the Drifter's Rest. Inside, the air smelled of stale whiskey and candle wax. The innkeeper, a woman named Mabel with gray hair pulled tight in a bun, sized him up as she slid a key across the counter. "Rooms upstairs, second door." "No trouble here?" she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. Elias nodded, his fingers brushing the key. "Just passing through," he murmured, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure of that himself. That night, as the town settled into an uneasy quiet, Elias sat on the edge of his bed, the satchel open beside him. Inside was a notebook, its pages yellowed and filled with lines of poetry words that danced between love and loss, hope and despair. He traced a finger over the ink, his lips moving silently, as if reciting the verses to an invisible audience. The words weren't his, though he carried them like a burden. They belonged to someone else, someone long gone, someone whose name he'd sworn to keep alive. Red Hollow wasn't just any town. Elias had heard the stories, whispers of a poet who'd lived here decades ago, a man named Caleb Wren, whose words could stir hearts and soothe souls. They called him the poet of the plains, a dreamer who'd wandered the West, penning verses that felt like they'd been plucked from the stars. But Caleb had vanished one night, leaving behind only his poems and a trail of broken hearts. Some said he'd been run out of town, others that he'd met a darker fate. The truth, Elias believed, was tied to the notebook in his hands. He'd found it a year ago in a pawn shop in Santa Fe, tucked between dusty trinkets and forgotten dreams. The moment he'd opened it, the words had pulled him in, like a current he couldn't fight. They spoke of a love so fierce it burned, of a woman named Lila who danced in the moonlight, her laughter brighter than any saloon's chandelier. But the poems ended abruptly, the final pages torn out, leaving only questions. Elias had followed the trail to Red Hollow, driven by a need he couldn't explain, a need to know what had happened to Caleb, and why his words felt like they were calling to him. The next morning, Elias wandered into the saloon, where the air was thick with the scent of tobacco and regret. A few early drinkers glanced his way, their eyes lingering on the guitar. "You a singer?" one asked, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek. Elias shook his head. "Just a traveler with a few stories," he said, settling at a table near the back. The bartender, a wiry fellow named Tom, leaned over. "Folks round here don't take kindly to strangers poking around. You got business? Best state it." Elias sipped his coffee, black as the night he'd arrived. "Heard of Caleb Wren?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The room seemed to still, the clink of glasses pausing for a heartbeat. Tom's face hardened. "Old Caley's. Best left buried," he said, turning away. But Elias caught the flicker in his eyes, fear, or maybe something else. He didn't press further, not yet. Red Hollow was a town that held its secrets close, and he'd need to tread lightly. As the day wore on, Elias explored the town, his boots crunching against the dry earth. The general store, the blacksmith, the church with its crooked steeple, they all seemed to hum with a quiet unease, as if the town itself was watching him. At the edge of Red Hollow, he found an old oak tree, its branches gnarled and heavy. Beneath it was a patch of earth, unmarked but oddly smooth, like someone had tended it long ago. He knelt, his fingers brushing the dirt, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert heat. That night, as he sat in his room, the guitar untouched, Elias opened the notebook again. The words seemed to shimmer, alive in a way that made his chest ache. He read of Lila's eyes like the sky before a storm, and of a love that promised forever, but ended in whispers. He didn't hear the faint creak of the floorboards outside his door, or the shadow that lingered just beyond the candlelight. Red Hollow was waking, and it had noticed him. The nights in Red Hollow carried a weight heavier than the day's heat, as if the darkness pressed down on the town, urging it to keep its secrets. Elias Kane lay awake in his room at the Drifter's Rest, the notebook open on his chest, its pages catching the flicker of a single candle. The words of Caleb Wren seemed to hum in the quiet, each verse pulling him deeper into a story he didn't yet understand. Outside, the wind howled softly, like a voice trying to speak but too shy to be clear. He closed his eyes, letting the poet's words drift through his mind, but sleep wouldn't come. Something in the air felt alive, watchful. By morning, Elias decided to dig deeper. He tucked the notebook into his satchel and headed to the general store, a squat building with shelves of dusty cans and bolts of faded cloth. The storekeeper, a wiry woman named Clara with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, was sweeping the floor when he entered. She glanced up, her broom pausing mid-stroke. "You're the fella from the inn," she said, not a question. Elias nodded, offering a small smile. "Just looking for some answers," he said, keeping his tone light. "Heard of a man named Caleb Wren? Poet, maybe lived here years back?" Clara's face tightened, her knuckles whitening on the broom handle. "Folks don't talk about him," she said curtly. "No good comes from staring up old ghosts." She turned back to her sweeping, but Elias caught the way her eyes darted to the window, as if expecting someone to be listening. He pressed gently, leaning against the counter. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just curious about his story. He left some poems behind, beautiful ones. Thought someone might know more." Clara hesitated, then sighed, setting the broom aside. "Caleb was trouble wrapped in pretty words," she said, her voice low. "Came to Red Hollow about 20 years ago, all charm and big dreams. Wrote poems that made folks cry, made him hope again. But he got tangled with Lila Monroe, and that's when things went sour. She paused, her eyes distant. Lila was the preacher's daughter, bright as a summer day. Loved Caleb something fierce, and he loved her back. But love like that, it burns too hot, draws eyes. Elias felt a spark in his chest, the name Lila matching the one in the poems. "What happened to them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head. "Nobody knows for sure. One night, Caleb up and vanished. Some say he ran off, others say, well, darker things. Lila was never the same after. Broke her heart, broke her spirit. She left town a year later, and folks stopped talking about either of them." She fixed Elias with a hard stare. "You'd do well to leave it be." But Elias couldn't. The poems in his satchel felt heavier now, like they were pulling him towards something. He thanked Clara and stepped back into the street, the sun high and merciless. As he walked, he noticed the townsfolk men hauling crates, women hanging laundry watching him with quick, guarded glances. Red Hollow was a town that didn't trust easily, and Elias was starting to feel like he'd kicked a hornet's nest just by asking questions. That afternoon, he found himself at the church, its steeple leaning like a tired old man. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dim interior with pews worn smooth by years of prayer. A man stood at the altar, polishing a brass candlestick. He was older, with a face carved by time and sorrow, his black coat marking him as the preacher. Elias cleared his throat. "Afternoon, sir. I'm Elias Kane, just passing through. Mind if I ask you about someone from years back? A poet, Caleb Wren?" The preacher froze, his hand still on the candlestick. When he turned, his eyes were sharp, like he could see straight through Elias. "Why do you ask about him?" His voice was calm, but edged with something cold. Elias kept his tone easy. Found some of his poems. "There's something special. Thought I'd learn more about the man who wrote M." The preacher set the candlestick down, slow and deliberate. "Caleb Wren was a fool," he said, his words clipped. "He came here with his fancy words, stirred up trouble, and paid the price. Let the dead rest, son." He turned back to his work, a clear dismissal. Elias lingered a moment, feeling the weight of the preacher's words. Paid the price. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. As evening fell, Elias sat on the porch of the inn, his guitar resting against the railing. He hadn't played it since arriving, but his fingers itched to try to see if Caleb's words could find life in music. He pulled the notebook from his satchel and read a line aloud, soft as a prayer. "Her eyes hold the sky, and I am lost in their storm." The words felt like they belonged here, in this dusty town where love had burned bright and then burned out. A shadow moved at the edge of the porch, quick and silent. Elias looked up, but no one was there. The air grew colder, the wind carrying a faint sound like a sigh or maybe a name. He stood, his heart beating a little faster, and scanned the empty street. Red Hollow was watching him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching back. The moon hung low over Red Hollow, casting a pale glow that made the town's shadows stretch long and thin, like fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. Elias Kane sat in his room, the notebook open on the small wooden table, its pages bathed in candlelight. He'd spent the day chasing whispers of Caleb Wren, but each answer only deepened the mystery. The poet's name seemed to stir the air itself, as if saying it aloud woke something that had been sleeping. Elias traced a line of poetry with his finger. Her laughter was a river, and I drowned gladly. The words felt alive, pulling at him, urging him to keep digging. He decided to try the saloon again, figuring nightfall might loosen tongues. The place was livelier now, filled with the clink of glasses and the low murmur of voices. Men played cards at rickety tables, their faces lit by flickering lanterns, while a woman in a faded red dress sang softly in the corner, her voice more weary than sweet. Elias ordered a whiskey, nursing it as he scanned the room. Tom, the bartender, was wiping down the counter, his eyes flicking toward Elias now and then. Elias waited until the crowd thinned before leaning in. "Tom," he said, keeping his voice low, "you know anything about Lila Monroe? Heard she was close to Caleb Wren." Tom's rag paused mid-swipe, his jaw tightening. "You don't quit, do you?" he muttered, glancing around. Lila was trouble, same as Caleb. Pretty girl, preacher's daughter, had half the town wrapped around her finger. But she only had eyes for that poet. They were always together, whispering and laughing like the rest of us didn't exist. Elias sipped his drink, letting Tom talk. "Folks didn't like it," the bartender went on. "Her pa, Preacher Monroe, he was strict. Didn't take kindly to Caleb's type dreamers with no money, no roots. And then there was Amos Reed." Tom's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Amos was a rancher, big man in town, thought Lila was his by right. He didn't take kindly to Caleb stealing her heart. Elias felt a chill, the pieces of the story starting to fit together. "What happened to Amos?" he asked. Tom shrugged, but his eyes were uneasy. "Still around, lives out on his ranch about a mile west. Mean as ever, but quieter now. After Caleb disappeared, folks thought, well, some thought Amos had a hand in it. Never proved nothing, though." He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "If you're smart, you'll stop asking questions. Red Hollow don't like its secrets being touched." Elias nodded, but his mind was racing. Amos Reed. A name to chase, a thread to pull. He finished his drink and stepped outside, the night air cool against his skin. The street was empty, save for the soft rustle of tumbleweeds skittering across the dirt. He started toward the inn, his boots crunching softly, when he heard a faint sound, like a woman's hum, coming from the direction of the old oak tree at the town's edge. He froze, his breath catching. The sound was gone as quickly as it came, but it left a shiver in its wake. Back in his room, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He set the notebook aside and picked up his guitar, strumming a few quiet chords. The music felt like a shield, a way to push back the unease creeping into his bones. He thought of Lila, her laughter, her storm sky eyes, and wondered what she'd seen in Caleb that made her defy her father, her town, maybe even her future. Love, he figured, had a way of making fools of everyone. The next morning, Elias decided to visit Amos Reed's ranch. He'd borrowed a horse from the inn's stable, a sturdy bay with a skeptical eye, and rode west, following a dusty trail that wound through scrubland and rocky hills. The ranch came into view just past noon, a sprawling spread of corrals and barns, with a weathered house at its heart. As Elias approached, a man stepped out onto the porch, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, his face hard as the desert itself. "Amos Reed." "Who are you?" Amos called, his voice rough but steady. Elias dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "Name's Elias Kane, just passing through. Heard you've been in Red Hollow a long time. Thought you might know about a man named Caleb Wren." Amos's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the railing like he might need to steady himself. "That name's got no place here," he said, his tone flat but dangerous. "Turn around, boy, and ride back to town." Elias held his ground, his heart pounding. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. "Just answers. Caleb's poems are still out there, touching folks. I think he deserves to be remembered." Amos stared at him long and hard, then spat into the dirt. "You're treading on thin ice," he said. "Caleb was a thief, stole what wasn't his. He got what was coming." He turned and walked back inside, the door slamming shut behind him. Elias stood there, the sun beating down, feeling like he'd stirred something dark. As he rode back to town, the wind picked up, carrying that faint hum again, clearer now, like a melody half remembered. He glanced over his shoulder, but the trail was empty. Back at the inn, he opened the notebook, his eyes falling on a new line he hadn't noticed before. "The oak knows our secrets, but it will not speak." The words sent a chill through him, and he wondered just how deep Red Hollow's roots ran. The air in Red Hollow seemed to thicken as Elias Kane walked its streets, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against him. Each step felt like a trespass, as if the town itself resented his questions about Caleb Wren. The notebook in his satchel was a quiet anchor, its pages holding a story that refused to stay buried. By midday, the sun hung high, painting the town in stark whites and deep shadows. Elias decided to return to the old oak tree at the town's edge, the one Clara had mentioned, and where he'd heard that strange hum the night before. Something about it called to him, like a thread tugging at his soul. The tree stood alone, its gnarled branches clawing at the sky, roots twisting into the earth like veins. Elias knelt beside the smooth patch of dirt beneath it, the spot that felt oddly tended. He brushed his fingers over the soil, half expecting to find something, a marker, a clue. Nothing but dust met his touch, yet the air felt heavy, charged with a presence he couldn't name. He sat back on his heels, pulling the notebook from his satchel. The pages fell open to a poem he'd read a dozen times, but today the words seemed sharper. "Beneath the oak, my heart lies still, waiting for the one who listens." He read the line aloud, his voice soft in the quiet. The wind stirred, carrying that faint hum again, clearer now, weaving through the branches like a lullaby. Elias closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It wasn't just a hum, it was a melody, fragile and sad, like something a woman might sing to soothe a broken heart. His thoughts drifted to Lila Monroe, her laughter, her storm sky eyes. Had she sat here under this tree with Caleb? Had she sung for him? A shadow fell across the dirt, and Elias opened his eyes to find a young woman standing a few paces away. She was no older than 20, her dark hair pinned loosely, her dress simple but clean. Her eyes, wide and gray, held a curiosity that bordered on caution. "You're the stranger of skin about Caleb," she said, her voice soft but steady. Elias stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "That's me, Elias Kane." "And you are?" "Sarah," she said, hesitating before adding, Sarah Monroe. Elias's heart skipped. Monroe? Any relation to Lila? Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. She was my aunt. Died before I was born, but my pa preacher Monroe talks about her sometimes. Not much, though. It hurts him. She glanced at the oak, her expression softening. You're looking for Caleb's story, aren't you? Elias nodded, sensing she knew more than she let on. I found his poems, he said, tapping the satchel. They're beautiful, but they end too soon. I want to know what happened to him. And to Lila. Sarah's eyes flicked to the notebook, then back to him. Folks don't like talking about them, she said. It's like the town made a pact to forget. But I've heard things, stories my pa lets slip when he thinks I'm not listening. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Caleb and Lila were in love, the kind that makes people jealous. They'd meet here, under this tree, away from prying eyes. Caleb would read his poems, and Lila would sing them, turning his words into songs. But not everyone was happy about it. My pa thought Caleb was trouble, said he'd ruin Lila's future. And Amos Reed. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the ground. Amos wanted Lila for himself. When Caleb disappeared, some folks thought Amos did something to him. Elias's pulse quickened. Did anyone ever find proof? Sarah shook her head. No, Amos was too powerful. Owned half the land around here. People were scared to point fingers. But after Caleb vanished, Lila changed. Stopped singing, stopped smiling. She'd come out here and sit for hours, like she was waiting for him to come back. Sarah's voice cracked, and she looked away. She never did get over him. Elias glanced at the oak, the smooth patch of earth suddenly feeling like more than just dirt. Do you think Caleb's still out there somewhere? He asked. Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment they seemed older than her years. No, she said quietly. I think he's here, in a way. This tree, it's like it holds on to them both. Sometimes when it's real quiet, I swear I hear her singing. The hum came again, faint but unmistakable, curling through the air like a memory. Elias felt it in his chest, a pull he couldn't ignore. Thank you, Sarah, he said, his voice gentle. If you hear anything else, will you tell me? She nodded, then turned to leave, her footsteps fading into the dust. That night, Elias sat in his room, the notebook open, his guitar in his lap. He strummed softly, trying to match the melody he'd heard under the oak. The notes felt close, but not quite right, like he was chasing a shadow. The candle flickered, casting long shapes on the walls, and for a moment, he thought he saw a figure, a woman, maybe, standing in the corner. He blinked, and it was gone. But the air felt heavier, and the hum lingered in his ears, soft as a whisper, calling him back to the oak. The dawn broke over Red Hollow with a reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the town's secrets. Elias Kane woke with the faint echo of that haunting melody still in his mind, the one he'd heard beneath the oak tree. It clung to him like a half-remembered dream, urging him to keep chasing Caleb Wren's story. The notebook lay on the table, its pages seeming to glow faintly in the morning's gray haze. Elias dressed quickly, his thoughts on Sarah Monroe's words, Lila's singing, Amos's jealousy, and the oak that seemed to hold more than just memories. He decided to visit the church again, hoping to coax more from Preacher Monroe. The old man's sharp dismissal last time had only fueled Elias's curiosity. As he walked through the dusty streets, the town felt quieter than usual, the usual clatter of wagons and voices muted. A few folks nodded as he passed, but their eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. Red Hollow was closing ranks, and Elias knew he was running out of time to uncover the truth. The church door creaked as he entered, the air inside cool and heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. Preacher Monroe was sweeping the aisle, his movements slow but deliberate. He glanced up, his face hardening at the sight of Elias. "You again," he said, his voice low and rough. "Thought I told you to let the past be." Elias raised a hand, palms open. "I mean no disrespect, sir, but I can't shake Caleb's poems. They're too alive to be forgotten. I think you know more about what happened to him." The preacher leaned on his broom, his eyes narrowing. "You're a fool, boy, digging where you don't belong. Caleb Wren was a dreamer, nothing more. He came here, turned my daughter's head with his words, and left her broken. That's all you need to know." His voice cracked on the word broken, and Elias saw a flicker of pain in the old man's eyes. "Lila," Elias said softly. "She loved him, didn't she?" Preacher Monroe's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elias thought he might swing the broom. Instead, the old man sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Lila was my light," he said, almost to himself. "Bright, kind, full of dreams. But she was young, too young to see Caleb for what he was, a wanderer with no future. I tried to protect her, told her to stay away, but she wouldn't listen. They'd sneak off to that damned oak tree, thinking I didn't know." He shook his head, his voice bitter. "When Caleb vanished, it killed her spirit. She left Red Hollow a year later, went to live with her aunt in Tucson. Died not long after. Consumption, they said, but I know it was a broken heart." Elias's chest ached at the words. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "But what happened to Caleb? Did he run, or—" He let the question hang, watching the preacher's face. Monroe's eyes darkened, and he gripped the broom tighter. "I don't know," he said, each word heavy. "Some say he left on his own. Others think Amos Reed had a hand in it. All I know is he was gone and my girl paid the price." He turned away, his voice dropping. "Leave it be, son. No good comes from chasing ghosts." Elias left the church, the preacher's words echoing in his mind. Amos Reed's name kept surfacing, a shadow cast over Caleb's disappearance. He needed to know more, but pushing Amos again felt like stepping into a rattler's den. Instead, he headed back to the saloon, hoping Tom might let something else slip. The place was quiet, just a few regulars nursing drinks. Tom was behind the counter, polishing glasses with a rag that looked older than the town itself. "Back for more stories?" Tom said, raising an eyebrow. Elias slid onto a stool, keeping his voice casual. "Just trying to piece things together. Preacher Monroe mentioned Amos Reed might have had it out for Caleb. You ever hear anything like that?" Tom's rag slowed, and he glanced around before leaning in. "Amos was a hard man, still is," he said. "Back then he thought Lila was his, like she was a prize to be won. Caleb showing up, writing poems, macking her laugh that burned Amos deep. Night Caleb disappeared. Someone saw Amos ridden into town late, looking like he'd been in a fight. Never proved nothing, but folks talked. Elias's pulse quickened. Where's Amos now? Still keep to himself? Tom nodded. Mostly. His ranch hands come into town for supplies, but Amos don't show his face much. If you're thinking of poking around out there, be careful. He don't take kindly to strangers. Elias thanked him and left, the weight of the notebook in his satchel heavier than ever. That evening, Elias sat under the oak tree, the sky bruised with twilight. He strummed his guitar, trying to catch the melody he'd heard before. The notes came closer this time, soft and mournful, like a song for someone lost. The air grew cooler, and that hum returned, weaving through his music like a second voice. He closed his eyes, letting it guide his fingers, and for a moment he felt her Lila, her presence as real as the earth beneath him. When he opened his eyes, the hum was gone, but the tree seemed to watch him, its branches still in the windless night. The stars above Red Hollow burned bright, sharper than any city's lamps, as if the sky itself wanted to bear witness to the town's buried truths. Elias Kane walked the empty streets, his boots scuffing the dirt, the notebook tucked safely in his satchel. The hum he'd heard under the oak tree lingered in his ears, a melody that felt like Lila's voice reaching across time. Each day in Red Hollow pulled him deeper into Caleb Wren's story, and the weight of it was starting to feel like a promise he hadn't meant to make. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the poet whose words refused to fade. By morning, Elias decided to seek out Sarah Monroe again. Her connection to Lila and her willingness to talk made her his best chance at unraveling more of the past. He found her at the general store, helping Clara stack jars of preserves on a shelf. Sarah glanced up as he entered, her gray eyes cautious but curious. "Mornin', Elias," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "You look like you've got more questions." Elias offered a small smile. "Guilty? Mind if we talk? Somewhere quiet?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They stepped outside to the store's porch, where the morning sun hadn't yet reached. Elias leaned against the railing, choosing his words carefully. "Your father told me about Lila, how Caleb's disappearance broke her. But I keep hearing Amos Reed's name tied to it. You ever hear anything about what happened that night?" Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. "Pa don't talk much about it," she said softly. "But when I was little, I'd hear him pray at night, asking for forgiveness. I always thought it was about Lila, maybe blaming himself for not saving her. But once I heard him mention Amos like he was scared of him." Elias's heart quickened. "Scared how?" Sarah looked out at the street, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like Amos knew something Pay didn't want folks to know. I was too young to understand, but I remember P saying once that Amos took care of things when Caleb disappeared. Never said what he meant, and I never asked. Pa gets that look when I bring up Lila or Caleb, like he's carrying a stone in his chest." She met Elias's eyes, her expression earnest. "If Amos did something to Caleb, he's never paid for it. But you're going out to his ranch? It's dangerous, Elias. He's not the kind to let things go." Elias nodded, her words settling like dust in his mind. "I appreciate the warning, Sarah. I'll be careful." He paused, then added, "You said Lila used to sing Caleb's poems. You ever hear any of them?" Sarah's face softened, a faint smile touching her lips. "Not from her, but Pay kept some of her things after she died. There's a little book of songs in the attic, ones she wrote down. I used to sneak up there and read them. They're sad but beautiful, like they're waiting for someone to sing him again. Elias felt a spark of hope. Could I see it? Might help me understand her and Caleb better. Sarah bit her lip, then nodded. I'll try to get it, but Pa's particular about Lila's things. I'll bring it to the oak tree tomorrow evening, if I can. Elias thanked her, feeling the pull of the oak stronger than ever. As Sarah went back inside, he headed to the saloon, needing a moment to think. The place was near empty, save for Tom wiping down tables. Elias ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the town move slowly through its day. Tom wandered over, his rag slung over his shoulder. You're still chassing that poet, ain't you? He said, half amused, half wary. Elias nodded, keeping his voice low. Can't help it. Feels like he's a-skin me to find him. You ever hear anything about Preacher Monroe and Amos Reed being tied up and Caleb's disappearance? Tom's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Elias. Nothing solid, he said. But back then, Amos and the preacher were thick as thieves. Amos gave money to the church, kept it standing. Some folks thought Monroe looked the other way when Amos got rough with folks. If Caleb crossed Amos, maybe the preacher didn't step in. That's all I'll say. He walked away, leaving Elias with more questions than answers. That evening, Elias returned to the oak tree, drawn by the memory of Lila's melody. He sat beneath its branches, his guitar in his lap, strumming softly as the sky deepened to indigo. The hum came again, clearer now, weaving through his chords like a duet. He closed his eyes, letting the music guide him, and for a moment he saw her Lila, her hair catching the moonlight, her lips moving in song. The vision faded, but the hum lingered, soft and insistent. Elias opened the notebook, his fingers finding a new line. Her song is the wind, and it carries my name. He stayed there until the stars were bright, the town silent behind him. As he walked back to the inn, a shadow moved across the street. Too quick to be sure. Elias paused, his hand on the satchel, but the night was empty. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Red Hollow was stirring, its secrets creeping closer with every step he took. The morning light crept into Red Hollow like a cautious guest, softening the town's hard edges, but not its secrets. Elias Kane sat on the edge of his bed at the Drifter's Rest, the notebook open beside him, its pages worn from his constant reading. The melody he'd heard under the oak tree clung to him, a fragile thread connecting him to Lila and Caleb. Sarah's promise to bring Lila's songbook tonight felt like a key, one that might unlock more of the poet's story. But the weight of Amos Reed's name and Preacher Monroe's fear pressed against him, warning him to tread carefully. Elias decided to spend the day quietly, avoiding questions that might stir more suspicion. He wandered to the blacksmith's shop, a low building where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out like a heartbeat. The blacksmith, a burly man named Jonah with soot-streaked arms, nodded as Elias entered. "Need something fixed, stranger?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Elias shook his head, leaning against the doorframe. "Just passing time. Been in Red Hollow long?" Jonah grunted, setting his hammer down. "Long enough." "Why?" "Curious about the town's history," Elias said, keeping his tone light. "Heard about a poet, Caleb Wren, from years back. You know anything about him?" Jonah's eyes flicked up, sharp but guarded. "Heard the name," he said gruffly. "Came through when I was a boy. Wrote pretty words, caused a stir. Then he was gone. That's all I know. He picked up his hammer again, the conversation clearly over. Elias thanked him and left, sensing the same wall he'd hit with others. Red Hollow guarded Caleb's story like a wound it didn't want touched. By afternoon, Elias found himself at the general store, buying a tin of tobacco to keep his hands busy. Clara, the storekeeper, watched him with her usual sharpness. "You're still here," she said, counting his change. "Thought you'd be gone by now." Elias smiled faintly. "Town's got a pull to it," he said. Clara snorted. "That's one way to put it. You keep a skin about Caleb, you'll find more than you bargained for." She paused, then added, "Be careful, boy. Some folks don't like the past being stirred." Her words echoed Sarah's warning, and Elias nodded, the notebook in his satchel feeling heavier. As evening fell, he made his way to the oak tree, the sky streaked with gold and purple. Sarah was already there, sitting on a root, a small leather-bound book clutched in her hands. Her face lit up when she saw him, but her eyes were nervous. "I got it," she said, holding out the book. "Lila's songs. Pa was out visiting a sick family, so I snuck into the attic. But we gotta be quick." Elias took the book, its cover soft with age, and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, lyrics woven with musical notes, each one a piece of Lila's heart. He read a line aloud, his voice soft. "My love is a shadow, gone with the dawn, yet I sing for him still." The words matched the melody he'd heard, and his chest tightened. "This is her," he murmured. Her voice, her love for Caleb. Sarah nodded, her eyes distant. "She wrote these after he disappeared. Pa says she'd sing 'em here, like she thought Caleb could hear her." Elias turned the pages, each song sadder than the last, until he found one titled "The Oak's Promise." It spoke of a love buried deep, waiting to be found. "Sarah," Elias said, looking up, "do you think Caleb's still here? Not alive, but here?" She shivered, glancing at the tree. "Sometimes I feel her, Lila, when I'm out here. Like she's waiting. Maybe Caleb's with her somehow." The air grew cooler, and that familiar hum rose, soft and mournful, curling around them like a breeze. Elias strummed his guitar, trying to match the notes, and Sarah hummed along, her voice blending with the wind. For a moment it felt like Lila was there, singing through them. A twig snapped nearby, and they both froze. Sarah's eyes widened, and she clutched the songbook. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Elias scanned the darkening trail, but no one appeared. The hum faded, leaving only silence. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his heart pounded. Sarah stood, her face pale. "I gotta get this back before Pay notices. Meet me here tomorrow night if you find something." She slipped away, her footsteps fading into the dusk. Elias stayed under the oak, the songbook's words echoing in his mind. He opened the notebook, comparing Caleb's poems to Lila's songs, and found a match, a line in both. "Our hearts are the roots, forever entwined." It felt like a vow, one that bound them even now. As he strummed his guitar, the hum returned, stronger, guiding his fingers to the right notes. He played until the stars were bright, the melody feeling like a bridge to something he couldn't yet see. Back at the inn, Elias lay awake, the songbook hidden under his pillow. The room felt too still, the shadows too deep. He thought he heard a creak outside his door, but when he checked, the hallway was empty. Still, The air carried a weight, like Red Hollow was holding its breath, waiting for him to uncover what it had buried so long ago. The night wrapped Red Hollow in a quiet so deep, it felt like the town was holding its breath. Elias Kane sat on the porch of the Drifter's Rest, his guitar resting against the railing, Lila's songbook tucked inside his satchel, next to Caleb's notebook. The melody he'd played under the oak tree lingered in his fingers, a fragile thread tying him to a love story that refused to fade. The stars above glittered like scattered coins, but the air carried a chill that had nothing to do with the desert's cooling. Elias felt the weight of Red Hollow's secrets pressing closer, as if the town knew he was nearing something dangerous. By morning, he decided to take a risk. Amos Reed's name loomed large, a shadow over Caleb's disappearance, and Elias couldn't ignore it any longer. He saddled the borrowed bay horse and rode west toward Amos's ranch, the trail winding through scrubland that seemed to whisper warnings. The ranch appeared as it had before, sprawling, weathered, a kingdom built on hard earth and harder will. As Elias approached, a ranch hand, a lean man with a sun-creased face, stepped out from a barn, his hand resting on a coiled rope. "What's your business?" he called, his tone more curious than hostile. "Elias Kane," Elias said, dismounting. "Looking to speak with Amos Reed, if he's around." The hand studied him, then jerked his head toward the house. "He's inside. Don't expect a warm welcome." Elias nodded his thanks and walked to the porch, his boots heavy on the steps. He knocked, the sound sharp in the stillness. After a long pause, the door creaked open, and Amos stood there, his broad frame filling the doorway, his eyes cold as flint. "You again," Amos said, his voice low and rough. "Told you to leave Caleb Wren be." Elias kept his stance easy, his hands loose at his sides. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "But Caleb's poems are out there, touching folks even now. I think you know what happened to him. Maybe it's time to let the truth breathe." Amos's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elias thought he might slam the door. Instead, he stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. "Caleb was a fool," Amos said, his words clipped. "Thought he could waltz into Red Hollow, steal Lila's heart, and walk away clean. He didn't know his place." Elias caught the bitterness in his tone, the kind that festers over years. "You loved her too," Elias said softly. "Didn't you?" Amos's eyes flashed, and he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Lila was mine before that poet showed up. I'd have given her everything, land, a home, a life. But she chose his pretty words over me. When he disappeared, she blamed me, but I didn't touch him. He ran like cowards do." Elias studied Amos's face, searching for the lie, but the man's eyes were steady, hard. "Someone saw you ridden into town that night, looking rough," Elias said, keeping his voice calm. "Like you'd been in a fight." Amos spat into the dirt, his hands clenching. "Folks see what they want to see. I was out checking fences, that's all. You want to dig up old bones, go bother someone else." He turned back to the house, the conversation over. Elias rode back to town, Amos's words ringing in his ears. The rancher's anger felt real, but so did his denial. If Amos hadn't touched Caleb, who had? The preacher's fear, Sarah's stories, the hum under the oak, they all pointed to something deeper, something Red Hollow didn't want him to find. Back at the inn, Elias opened Lila's songbook, reading her lyrics again. One song caught his eye, untitled but marked with a small drawing of an oak leaf. He left me in shadow, but I'll sing till he's found. The words felt like a vow, one Lila had kept until her last breath. That evening, Elias met Sarah under the oak tree, as promised. She looked nervous, her hands twisting together. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice low. Elias recounted his talk with Amos, leaving out the man's venom. Sarah frowned, glancing at the tree. "Amos always scared me," she said. "Even when I was little, he'd look at Pay like he owned him. If he didn't hurt Caleb, maybe he knows who did." Elias nodded, handing her the songbook. "Lila's songs, they're like she's still here, singing for him. I heard her last night, Sarah, under this tree." Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't laugh. "I've heard it too," she whispered. "When I read her songs, it's like she's trying to tell me something." They sat in silence, the hum rising softly, weaving through the branches. Elias strummed his guitar, matching the melody, and Sarah joined in, her voice faint but clear. The air felt alive, heavy with a presence that wasn't just memory. As they played, a shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing, gone before Elias could focus. His pulse quickened, but he kept playing, the music holding the darkness at bay. When Sarah left, Elias stayed, the oak's branches swaying above him. He opened Caleb's notebook, finding a line that mirrored Lila's song. "My shadow waits where the oak stands tall." The words felt like a map, pointing to this very spot. As he packed up his guitar, the hum grew louder, almost a voice calling his name. He looked around, but the night was empty. Still, he knew he was close to whatever Red Hollow was hiding. The desert night settled over Red Hollow like a heavy blanket, muffling sound and sharpening shadows. Elias Kane sat beneath the oak tree, his guitar resting against a root, the air thick with the memory of Lila's melody. The hum had grown stronger each time he came here, as if the tree itself were singing Caleb and Lila's story. The notebook and songbook lay open in his lap, their words intertwining like lovers' hands, each line a piece of a puzzle he was desperate to solve. Amos Reed's denial echoed in his mind, but so did the rancher's bitterness, a wound that hadn't healed in 20 years. Elias knew he was circling something dangerous, but the pull of the poet's story was stronger than his fear. By morning he decided to seek out Jonah, the blacksmith, again. The man's gruff dismissal hadn't felt final, and Elias hoped a second try might loosen his tongue. The blacksmith's shop was alive with the clang of metal and the hiss of steam. Jonah's broad frame bent over an anvil. He glanced up as Elias approached, his eyes narrowing. "Back again?" he grunted, not pausing his work. Elias leaned against a post, keeping his tone easy. "Can't help it, Jonah. Caleb Wren's stories got a hold on me. You said you were a boy when he was here. You must have seen something him and Lila, maybe, or Amos Reed stir in trouble." Jonah's hammer slowed, his jaw tightening. He set it down, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're like a dog with a bone," he said, his voice low. "I was 12 when Caleb came through. Used to sneak out to hear him read his poems at the saloon. He had a way of making folks feel. Bigger, like their lives meant something. Lila was always there, smiling like she'd found the sun. But Amos didn't like it. He'd watch him from the back, his face dark as a storm." Jonah paused, his eyes distant. "Night Caleb disappeared. I was out late, fishing by the creek. Saw Amos ridden hard from the oak tree, his horse lathered. Looked like he was running from something. Elias's pulse quickened. Did you tell anyone? Jonah shook his head. Who'd listen to a kid? Besides, Amos was a big man, even then. Folks were scared of him. Still are. He picked up his hammer, his voice hardening. That's all I got. Don't come back again for more. Elias nodded, thanking him, and stepped back into the sunlight, Jonah's words painting a clearer picture. Amos at the oak tree the night Caleb vanished. It was a thread worth pulling. He spent the afternoon at the saloon, sipping coffee and turning over what he'd learned. Tom, the bartender, was busier today, serving a handful of ranch hands who laughed too loud and drank too fast. Elias kept to himself, but one of the hands, a young man with a sunburned face, noticed him. You the fella askin about old ghosts? He said, grinning. Elias raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast. You got something to share? The hand shrugged, leaning closer. My pa worked for Amos back in the day. Said Amos was crazy for Lila Monroe. Got mean when she chose that poet. After Caleb was gone, Amos burned a pile of papers out back of his ranch. Pa thought it was poems, maybe Caleb's. Elias filed that away, his mind racing. Burning poems didn't prove murder, but it hinted at guilt. As evening fell, he headed to the oak tree to meet Sarah, hoping she'd brought more of Lila's songs. She was there, her face pale in the twilight, clutching a single sheet of paper. I couldn't take the whole book again, she whispered. Pa's been watching me closer, but I copied this one. It's different, Elias. It's angry. She handed him the page, the ink fresh, but the words Lila's. He took my love, left me to weep under the oak where shadows creep. Elias read it twice, his chest tightening. This isn't just about Caleb leaving, he said. It's like she's blaming someone. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. I think it's Amos. Or maybe Pa. She wrote this right before she left for Tucson. It's the last song in the book. The hum rose around them, sharper now, almost a wail. Elias strummed his guitar, trying to match it, and Sarah sang the words softly, her voice trembling. The melody felt raw, like a wound laid bare, and the air grew heavy, the oak's branches swaying without wind. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, and Elias's hand froze on the strings. Sarah, get behind me, he said quietly. She obeyed, her breath quick. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Tom, the bartender, his face grim. You two need to stop this, he said, his voice low. You're staring things that don't need staring. Elias stood, his guitar in one hand. We're just trying to understand, Tom. If you know something, tell us. Tom shook his head, his eyes darting to the tree. Some truths are better left buried. Go back to the inn, Elias. And you, Sarah, get home. He turned and vanished into the dark. Elias and Sarah stood frozen, the hum fading to silence. He's scared, Sarah whispered. Like Pa. Elias nodded, his mind on the oak, on Amos, on the poems that might have burned. The truth was close, but so was the danger, and Red Hollow was watching every step he took. The dawn in Red Hollow crept in with a chill that clung to the bones, as if the town itself were reluctant to face the light. Elias Kane sat in his room at the Drifter's Rest. Lila's copied song and Caleb's notebook spread before him on the table. The angry words of Lila's last song, he took my love, left me to weep, Under the oak where shadows creep, echoed in his mind a cry that pointed to Amos Reed, or perhaps Preacher Monroe. Tom's warning under the oak tree last night had only sharpened Elias's resolve. The hum, Lila's melody, felt like a guide now, urging him closer to a truth Red Hollow seemed desperate to bury. Elias decided to confront Preacher Monroe again, hoping to press him on the fear Sarah had mentioned. He found the preacher outside the church, tending a small patch of flowers near the steps. The old man's hands moved gently, but his face was etched with a sorrow that seemed older than the town itself. "Mornin', preacher," Elias said, keeping his voice soft. Monroe glanced up, his eyes narrowing. "You're still here," he said, his tone flat. "Thought you'd have moved on by now." Elias crouched beside him, pretending to admire the flowers. "Can't leave yet," he said. "Not till I understand what happened to Caleb Wren." "I found one of Lila's songs, sir. Sounds like she blamed someone for tucking him away. Was it Amos Reed?" The preacher's hands stilled, dirt clinging to his fingers. For a long moment he said nothing, then sighed, his voice low. "You're digging in places that'll only bring pain, son. Lila was hurt, wrote things in her grief. Don't mean they're true. But you were scared of Amos," Elias pressed, his tone gentle but firm. "Sarah said you prayed for forgiveness, mentioned his name like he held something over you." Monroe's face paled, and he stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Sarah's got no business speaking of that," he snapped, but his voice cracked. He looked away, his shoulders sagging. "Amos was powerful. Gave money to the church, kept us afloat. When Caleb came, stirring up trouble, Amos didn't take kindly to it. I tried to keep Lila away from that poet, but she wouldn't listen. When Caleb disappeared, Amos said he'd handle things. I didn't ask what he meant. I was a coward, Elias. I let it go." Elias's heart pounded. "Handle things, how?" Monroe shook his head, his eyes haunted. "I don't know. Amos never said, and I never pressed. Lila thought he'd done something to Caleb, but there was no proof. She left town, and I lost her anyway." His voice broke, and he turned back to the flowers, dismissing Elias without another word. The preacher's confession wasn't proof, but it was a crack in Red Hollow's wall, and Elias felt the truth seeping through. He headed to the saloon, needing to clear his head. Tom was behind the counter, his face unreadable as Elias ordered a coffee. "You didn't listen," Tom said, sliding the cup over. "Told you to stop staring things." Elias met his gaze. "I can't, Tom. Lila's songs, Caleb's poems, they're a skin to be heard. You were there last night under the oak. Why are you so scared?" Tom's rag paused, his eyes flicking to the door. "Because I was here when it happened," he said, his voice barely audible. "I was young, working odd jobs. Night Caleb vanished. I saw Amos and the preacher arguing outside the church, late. Amos looked angry. The preacher looked sick. Next day, Caleb was gone. I didn't say nothing then, and I ain't saying more now." Elias leaned closer. "Tom, if Amos hurt Caleb, he can't keep hiding forever. Help me." Tom shook his head, his face tight. "You don't know Amos. He don't forgive, and he don't forget. And he don't forget. Leave it, Elias, or you'll end up like Caleb." He walked away, leaving Elias with a cold knot in his chest. Amos and the preacher arguing the night Caleb disappeared, It was more than a rumor now, but proof was still out of reach, and Elias knew he was running out of time. That evening, he returned to the oak tree, drawn by the hum that seemed to grow stronger with each visit. He sat beneath its branches, his guitar in his lap, strumming the melody from Lila's song. The notes felt right now, like he'd finally caught her voice. The hum joined him, weaving through his chords, and he closed his eyes, letting the music carry him. For a moment he saw them, Lila and Caleb, sitting here, her head on his shoulder, his voice reciting poetry. The vision faded, but the hum lingered, sharp and urgent, like a warning. A rustle broke the spell, and Elias opened his eyes. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, her face pale. "Elias," she whispered, stepping closer. "I overheard Pay talking to someone at the church today. He sounded scared, said something about keeping the oak quiet. I think he knows more than he's telling." Elias's pulse raced. Did he say who he was talking to? Sarah shook her head. No, but it wasn't Amos. The voice was softer, older. "Elias, I'm scared. What if Pa's hiding something awful?" Elias stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're close, Sarah. I'll talk to him again, careful like. Go home, stay safe." She nodded, slipping into the dark. Alone, Elias strummed the guitar once more, the hum rising like a tide. The oak seemed to watch him, its roots deep in secrets he was determined to unearth. The twilight over Red Hollow draped the town in a hush, as if every creak of wood and sigh of wind were part of a secret conversation. Elias Kane walked the familiar path to the oak tree, his satchel heavy with Caleb's notebook and the copied page of Lila's song. The hum that had guided him for days felt sharper now, almost a voice, urging him toward a truth that Red Hollow seemed desperate to keep buried. Preacher Monroe's confession and Tom's whispered warning painted a picture of guilt and fear, with Amos Reed at its center. But Sarah's words about her father, keeping the oak quiet, gnawed at Elias, hinting at a deeper role the preacher might have played. Elias decided to confront Monroe one last time, but not yet. First, he needed to ground himself in Lila and Caleb's story to feel their presence under the oak. He reached the tree as the sky deepened to indigo, its branches swaying gently despite the still air. Sitting on a root, he opened the notebook, reading Caleb's words by the faint light of a lantern. "Her voice is my home, though the world cast me out." Then he unfolded Lila's song, her angry verse cutting through the quiet. "He took my love, left me to weep under the oak where shadows creep." The words felt like a map pointing to this very spot. He picked up his guitar, strumming the melody he'd pieced together from Lila's hum. The notes flowed easily now, each one blending with the soft hum that rose from the air, like a duet across time. Elias closed his eyes, letting the music carry him, and for a moment he saw them, Lila and Caleb, young and in love, their laughter mingling with the wind. The vision was so vivid he could almost smell the wildflowers she'd tucked into her hair. But the hum grew sharp, pulling him back, and he opened his eyes to find the clearing empty, the lantern's light flickering. A sound broke the silence, a soft crunch of boots on dirt. Elias set the guitar down, his hand resting on the satchel. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but low. Sarah stepped into the light, her face pale, her eyes wide with urgency. "Elias, I couldn't wait," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I found something in Pa's study, hidden in a drawer. It's a letter from Amos to Pa, dated the week Caleb disappeared. She held out a folded paper, its edges yellowed with age. Elias took it, his heart racing, and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was bold, uneven, unmistakably Amos's. "Monroe, you know what's done is done. Keep your mouth shut, and the church stays standing. The oak will hold its tongue, and so will we." The words sent a chill through him, colder than the desert night. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "this ties Amos to the preacher and the oak. Did your pay ever mention this?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, but he's been actin' strange, pacin' at night, prayin' louder. I think he's scared it's all comin' back." Elias tucked the letter into his satchel, his mind racing. "This isn't proof Amos hurt Caleb, but it's close. I need to talk to your pa, see if he'll crack." Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "Be careful, Elias. If Amos finds out you've got this, he won't let it slide. And pa, he's fragile. Push too hard, and he might break." Elias nodded, his expression softening. "I'll be gentle, Sarah. Go home, stay safe. I'll meet you here tomorrow night." She hesitated, then slipped into the darkness, her footsteps fading. Elias sat back under the oak, the letter's weight heavier than the notebook and songbook combined. He strummed his guitar again, the hum returning, softer now, like a sigh of relief. The melody felt complete, Lila's voice woven into every note. He played until the stars were bright, the oak's branches seeming to lean closer, as if listening. As he packed up, the hum grew faint, but a new sound caught his ear, a low whisper, almost a name carried on the wind. He froze, scanning the clearing, but saw nothing. Back at the inn, Elias hid the letter under a loose floorboard in his room, alongside the songbook page. Sleep wouldn't come, his thoughts tangled with Amos's threat, Monroe's guilt, and the oak's secrets. By morning, he headed to the church, the letter's words burned into his mind. Preacher Monroe was inside, polishing the altar, his movements slow and weary. He looked up as Elias entered, his face tightening. "You don't give up, do you?" he said, his voice heavy. Elias stepped closer, keeping his tone calm. "I found a letter, sir, from Amos to you. Talks about keeping the oak quiet, about something being done." What did he mean? Monroe's hand froze, the cloth slipping from his fingers. His face drained of color, and he sank onto a pew, his eyes distant. "You've gone too far," he whispered. "That night, I didn't know what Amos planned. He said he'd talk to Caleb, scare him off. When I saw him after, he said it was handled, but his hands..." Monroe's voice broke. "They were bruised, Elias. I never asked more. God forgive me, I never asked." Elias's chest tightened, the preacher's words a confession of complicity, if not guilt. "Where's Caleb now?" he asked softly. Monroe shook his head, tears glinting in his eyes. "I don't know. The oak, it's all tied to that damned tree. Leave it be, son, or you'll lose more than you came with." Elias left the church, the preacher's words echoing, the oak calling him back to its roots. The moon cast a silver veil over Red Hollow, turning the town into a dream where shadows whispered and secrets stirred. Elias Kane stood beneath the oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching into the night like arms guarding a long-kept vow. The hum was stronger now, a melody that felt like Lila's voice, woven with Caleb's heart, urging Elias to finish what he'd started. The letter from Amos to Preacher Monroe, hidden under the floorboard in his room, burned in his mind, a thread tying the rancher, the preacher, and the oak to Caleb's disappearance. Tonight, Elias knew, was his last chance to uncover the truth before Red Hollow's secrets closed around him for good. He'd spent the day in quiet preparation, avoiding the saloon and the curious eyes of the townsfolk. Sarah's warning about Amos's ruthlessness and Monroe's fragile guilt echoed in his thoughts, but the oak's pull was stronger. Elias carried his guitar, the notebook, and Lila's copied song, each a piece of the story he'd pieced together. As he sat on a root, the air felt heavy, alive with a presence that wasn't just memory. He opened the notebook, reading Caleb's final poem, "My love is the earth, and I rest where she sings." Then Lila's song, its angry verse a cry for justice, "Under the oak where shadows creep." Elias strummed his guitar, the melody flowing effortlessly now, each note blending with the hum that rose from the earth. The music felt like a bridge, connecting him to Lila and Caleb, their love and loss alive in every chord. He closed his eyes, letting the song carry him, and saw them Lila, her storm sky eyes bright with tears, and Caleb, his voice soft with poetry, standing under this very tree. The vision was so clear he could almost touch them, but the hum sharpened, pulling him back. He opened his eyes, the clearing bathed in moonlight, the oak's roots seeming to pulse beneath the smooth patch of dirt. He set the guitar down and knelt, his fingers brushing the earth. It was softer here, looser, as if it had been disturbed long ago. The hum grew louder, almost a voice urging him to dig. Elias hesitated, his heart pounding, then pulled a small knife from his boot and began to scrape at the soil. The dirt gave way easily, revealing something hard, a wooden box, small and weathered, buried shallow. He lifted it carefully, his hands trembling. The hum was a song now, Lila's melody clear and haunting. Inside the box was a bundle of papers, tied with faded ribbon. Elias untied it, his breath catching as he recognized Caleb's handwriting poems. Dozens of them, the missing pages from the notebook. Beneath them was a single sheet in Lila's hand, a letter addressed to no one. "They took him from me under the oak." Amos's hands, Monroe's silence. "I sing for you, Caleb, till the truth is free." Tears stung Elias's eyes. This was it proof, or as close as he'd get. Amos had done something to Caleb, and Monroe had let it happen. The oak had held their secret, and Lila had left this for someone to find. A shadow fell across the clearing, and Elias froze. Amos Reed stood at the edge, his broad frame silhouetted against the moon, his eyes glinting with a cold fury. "You should have left, boy," he said, his voice rough as gravel. Elias stood slowly, the box clutched in one hand. "I found Lila's letter, Amos, and Caleb's poems. What did you do to him?" Amos stepped closer, his hands clenched. "Caleb was a thief, stealing what was mine. I told him to leave that night under this tree. He laughed, said Lila'd never choose me, so I made sure he'd never choose again." Elias's chest tightened, the hum roaring in his ears. "You killed him," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. Amos's face twisted, but he didn't deny it. "Buried him deep where no one'd look. Monroe knew, kept quiet for his church. You think you can change that now?" He lunged, but Elias sidestepped, clutching the box. "The truth's out, Amos. Lila's letter, Caleb's poems, they'll speak for him. Amos roared, grabbing for him, but a gust of wind swept through the clearing, the hum rising to a wail. Amos stumbled, his face paling, as if the oak itself had pushed him back. Elias ran, the box under his arm, his heart pounding as he reached the inn. He hid the box with the letter and songbook, then sat, breathless, knowing Amos wouldn't follow not tonight. The hum faded, but he felt Lila and Caleb's presence, their story finally free. By morning, he'd leave Red Hollow, the poems and letter in hand, to share their truth with the world. The oak would keep its peace, and so would they. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.